Today I want to talk about a problem that I see painters face over and over again, which I'm going to call painting by the seat of your pants. This phrase originally comes from pilots who describe flying the plane by the seat of one's pants, or feeling the way the plane feels beneath you, as opposed to relying on instruments to fly. But the phrase is really common in writing and means when you sit down to a creative subject and just wing it, without much planning. This is such a common creative discussion that almost every writer will be familiar with the question of, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Meaning, do you sit down and plot out your entire story from beginning to end before you start writing? Or do you just sit down and figure out the story as you go? The question tells a writer a lot about their approach and what common pitfalls of that approach they could potentially tighten up or address. I think it's really helpful for writers to think about this, but as artists, I don't think we talk about this nearly enough, and it's hurting our paintings. So today I want to share with you a painting that shows really clearly the benefit that fully planning a painting can truly have. So in the upper right-hand corner, I'll show you my plan for this piece. And what you're seeing there is not the final painting. This is a Photoshop plan of the painting that I'm about to create. This is also what I showed my amazing client who commissioned this piece before I even started, to give her a clear sense of how the finished painting would look so that there would be no surprises. I have students ask me all the time how to get fantastic clients who will love a finished painting. And this is the biggest tool I have in that toolkit, aside from having a commission agreement, of course, which is always step one. But when my clients see this plan, I tell them that the only real difference they should expect is that the final thing they see is a painting, instead of something that looks photographic like this plan. I can then ask if there's anything they think that they'd like changed, and I can work with them before I ever sit down to paint to tweak the mock-up and mitigate those concerns, and really just get really clear in the communication exactly what I'm intending and exactly what they want so that we can avoid any miscommunication or confusion. And by the way, if you want to know how I created this Photoshop mock-up of this piece, this is something I teach my students how to do step by step so that they can go into their paintings and even commissions every bit as confidently as I do. If you'd like to be in on that, I'll put a link in the description that you can check out to see if we would be a great fit to work together. So I love this tool for commissions, as you can imagine, but I want to talk about it today because I don't think enough artists use this as their everyday painting practice strategy to ensure that they're making really solid paintings, and I want to help fix that. One of the biggest things I see happen over and over again is that a painter shows me a painting that they're disappointed with, and when they start telling me about the process of making it, there is one trend that is basically guaranteed to be there, and that is that they're making significant changes to the reference in the middle of painting it. And here's the thing, if this is you, you might not even realize you're making these changes. So let me talk a bit about what those might be. Whether you're painting a model who's sitting for you, or a still life you've set up, or you're working from a photo, little things like changing the lighting, that could be the direction, the color, the intensity, changing the pose of the model, changing the color of an outfit, or moving objects around in the painting, creep up time and time again. Now, some of the obvious changes might be rearranging the composition, and you might be perfectly aware when you're trying to do this. But one thing that I see happen over and over is attempting to correct the lighting of an image or correct the colors of an image. This is something I see pretty much every painter do, and chances are you might not even be aware that you're doing this. I find that this comes up really frequently when the reference just isn't really great. Like when you take a picture of a fantastic model that you're excited to paint from, but the lighting was maybe overcast, or you didn't have a great camera, or you just couldn't get a shot of the model in flattering light. And the result is that you don't have a great image to work from. Maybe the exposure is off, maybe everything feels a bit kind of fuzzy, or there isn't a lot of visual information there, or maybe the light's coming from behind your subject, maybe her face is in shadow. Whatever the case may be, one of the most common things I find is that painters will artificially change the light to bump up the light and shadow, or create a light and shadow pattern that isn't there, or try and find more color in a subject when it really isn't there. Oftentimes when this happens, painters will come to me with questions about how I would execute on making these kinds of changes. And my answer is that I don't know. I don't know how to fix that problem. I don't know whether it would look better to move the subject to the left-hand side of the canvas, or reshoot it with different lighting, or abstract the background, or remove an object from the composition. That's just too complex for me to effectively visualize and hold all in my head. So instead, I don't guess, I test. If I'm working from life, I'll tweak my setup until I know that I don't need to change it any further, and I can sit down and paint without thinking about the composition anymore. And if I'm working from a photo, I'll adjust that photo in Photoshop until I fully see the painting that's waiting for me there, just like I did with this one. I think it's easy to try and bypass the Photoshop step if you aren't comfortable with that software or any of the free Photoshop equivalents that are out there. But the truth is, if you can't fix it in Photoshop, you probably can't fix it in Paint. Aside from literally changing something from a photo to a series of brushstrokes that look convincingly like a painting, anything I can do with Paint, I can do way easier in Photoshop and way faster. And once you learn it, you can do those same things too. So my advice is to stop telling yourself that it will be easier to change something in the middle of the painting. If you're getting tripped up on a painting and you made adjustments to the composition, values, colors, etc. mid-painting, I can confidently guarantee that that is part of the problem. But the good news is that I know how to fix it, and that's what this video is about. So let me tell you a bit about what I did here to preempt that. So before we start, I should begin by saying that I obviously did not paint this from life, and my process reflects that. But whether you're painting something from life or you have to work from a photo, the same principles apply. So whether you work from life or not, here is how I think about this process of bulletproof planning for your paintings. 1. Get your entire composition as rock solid as you can in person from life. Go out to your landscape at the right time of day and the right weather at the right time of year. I know that sounds like a lot of work, and maybe you don't want to wait for winter in order to paint a snow scene, but you're going to paint a way better snow scene that you plan around being able to actually observe rather than one you try to imagine. If you're working in still life, arrange all of your objects in your composition exactly how you want them in the setup from life that's right in front of you. If you're painting a model, have your model dressed in the right clothing, with the right hair, with the right makeup, and in the right pose, and in the right lighting, so that you want to paint them exactly as you see them in person. The closer your reference is to a painting that you would love as you see it in person from life, the easier the entire rest of the process is. And I'll let you in on a secret, it is always easier to change something from life than it is to change it once you've taken a photo. And if you're wondering what it means to have your reference already look like a painting when you just look at it in front of you, I talk about this in a previous video with an example I gave of a David Lafell reference, and I will link to that right now above. But the basic idea is that most of the amazing paintings you love had a reference that looks pretty much just like the final painting. There isn't some magic that happens in the mind of the artist while they paint. All of that magic happens in the planning, which is what we're talking about today. All right, step 2. If you need to photograph the reference, so for instance, if you are painting a squirmy child or a squirmy animal, this is probably a step that you won't be able to avoid. Same thing if you have a really rapidly changing light, or basically there's just something that won't sit still long enough for you to actually paint it. Once everything is close as you can possibly make it from life, go ahead and take a photo that captures your subject with as much fidelity as possible. Cameras are notorious for distorting what you see from life. I can basically guarantee you that your values, your colors, and your edges will shift when you go from observing your setup with your naked eye to taking a reference photo. And we want to minimize that as much as we can if we have to go through a necessary step of taking a photograph. Then step 3 is to offload your photo to a computer, load it up in Photoshop, and make any additional adjustments to the image that you could not make in camera. And then you can make any adjustments that only Photoshop can accomplish. So for instance, for this painting, I added the abstract brush marks that are in the background, which are easiest to visualize by just photographing brushwork I've already made and pasting that into the reference on top of the photo that I have of the horse, which is how I arrived at that mock-up that you see. Photoshop is really only there to do the steps that you cannot do any other way, including adjusting your camera settings beyond what the camera itself can do. I'd much rather just have my model in the correct lighting or wearing the correct clothes rather than having to mess around in Photoshop to magically put them in a different outfit or try and somehow move the lighting or change it even subtly. Which brings us to the final step, which is to avoid adding additional layers of distortion, such as through printing your reference. Printers are notoriously bad at matching what you can see on a screen and reproducing it, and can ruin the colors and values you painstakingly got perfect in the camera or in Photoshop. Occasionally, it can be helpful to have a printout that you can make marks on, but in general, I prefer to avoid printing whenever possible, mostly for my own sanity's sake because I hate operating a printer, but it also really serves me in terms of not having that additional layer of distortion. I'm not sure a better way to put it, that is affecting my reference. So if I had to go ahead and sum all of this up, here's what I would say. If you recognize yourself somewhere in this video, if you have ever done any of the things that I mentioned, do what you have to do to really start getting serious about planning your paintings. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think this is one of the biggest things that distinguishes your favorite painters from yourself. It isn't that they make magic happen with a brush, even if maybe they do. The biggest difference is the amount of care and planning that they go through before they ever set brush to canvas. A lot of painters I know will go through hours upon hours, if not more, to plan their paintings. And honestly, if you are ever getting really frustrated with your results, this is where I would start. I would get really, really clear on exactly the kind of painting you want to have, what that looks like from a composition perspective, and take the time to actually make that happen. Worst case scenario, you lost a few hours planning a painting and you hopefully had fun doing it. But if you truly take the time to have a reference, whether it's from life or from a photo, that just looks like a painting already, you're probably going to be able to make a painting that you're really, really happy with. And I think that's worth the extra effort. If you want to hear in depth how I do this and how I help other artists do this, again, I have a link in the description to find out if we're a great fit to work together, and I would love to hear from you. And if you're interested in commissioning a piece like this, I have very limited commission slots for really fantastic projects, and I will add a link in the description to that as well. As always, if you found this video helpful or it resonated with what you needed to hear today, please make sure to give this video a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon if you haven't already. And until next time, happy painting.